Hello there. Thank you for finding your way to a story that might just leave you speechless. If one day you were told you had only 3 months to live, what would you do? Travel the world? Write a beautiful will? Or adopt 5 homeless children you've never met, all because of a single glance exchanged on a rainy night? Yes, they laughed at him, called it a pitiful joke at the end of a rich man's life. But they stopped laughing. The moment those 5 children did something no one could have predicted. They saved the very man who was ready to give up on life. And you, watch this video now. Do you believe that kindness can rewrite destiny? Do you believe a real family can begin with trust, not blood? Walk with me through this journey. Because if you're tired, if you've lost faith, or if you just want something to softly touch your heart today, then this story is the quiet gift you didn't know you needed. Subscribe to this channel so you don't miss stories that are not just about surviving, but about coming back to life. And this story begins on a cold, rainy night in Seattle. Connor Whitmore, a billionaire standing at the edge of his life, pulled over beside a dark alley. No one knew why he stopped. Maybe it was the rain. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was because of 5 small figures huddled beneath damp cardboard, eyes that weren't begging, but daring the world that had abandoned them. He stepped out of the car, not to save anyone, but because, deep down, he was the one who needed saving. If you had only 3 months left to live, would you spend them building more walls or breaking them down so someone might walk in? I was there that night, standing across the street, half hidden behind an old Photoshop counter, my camera silent in my hands, watching something unfold that no one would have believed. It was raining in Seattle, the kind of rain that drives even rats to hide deep inside the sewers. The city shimmered with window lights from high-rises, puddles glowing red and green from traffic signals, footsteps rushing beneath umbrellas. But in the middle of all that glow, there was a man standing still. That was the first time I ever saw Connor Whitmore in real life. He didn't belong on that street, not at that hour. The CEO of Whitmore Systems, the name that sent ripples through financial circles, had no reason to stop in a rain-soaked alley of Pioneer Square. But he did. He stepped out of the luxury car, alone. No umbrella, no assistant, no entourage, unless something inside him had already broken. It wasn't until later that I learned what had shattered within him. But in that moment, all I saw was a powerful man standing still at the edge of a forgotten world, as if his soul had just heard something the rest of the world had long stopped listening to. And then I saw them. The boys, 5 of them, huddled together like a single body. Coats stuffed with old newspaper, shoes taped at the seams. The oldest, maybe 16, stood first, eyes like blades. The quick glance he threw behind him said everything. He was the leader, and the others would follow if he moved. But they didn't run, because the man before them, instead of pulling out a phone or yelling at them like so many others would, knelt down. I couldn't hear what was said, not from where I stood, but I saw his shoulders lower slightly, saw his hand reach out, not to command, not out of pity, just an open gesture, waiting. It was the youngest who stepped forward. A thin little boy, maybe 8 or 9, with wide eyes under rain-matted hair. He stepped away from the cluster, clutching something tight beneath his thin coat. Connor said something. The boy responded. And then unbelievably. They followed him. 5 homeless children following a stranger. Into his car. Into the world of a man who had, just that afternoon, opened an envelope from his doctor that read, "You have 3 months to live." A few hours earlier, Connor Whitmore had stood alone by the floor-to-ceiling window on the 42nd floor, watching the rain fall over Puget Sound. He hadn't moved for hours. They told me he didn't react when he read the doctor's letter. Just read it, folded it, placed it on the desk, then poured himself a glass of rare whiskey and never drank it. Connor had built walls around his life. Walls made of money, power, and silence. No children, no wife, no real friends since Elizabeth, his one and only wife, passed away from the same kind of cancer. His younger brother had cut ties over a decade ago. The board of directors waited like vultures for him to fall so they could take his seat. An empire of wealth, and a heart no one called home. That night, instead of attending the company's winter gala, he quietly took his car and drove himself with no destination. He drove past streets he once walked as a young man, books under arm, neighborhoods that no longer appeared on his mental map. And then he stopped at Pioneer Square in the middle of the night, in slicing rain, and everything began from there. I was there because I had been following those 5 boys for nearly a month, not stalking them, documenting. I was doing a photo project for a nonprofit called The Forgotten Children, a name that sounded poetic enough to get grants, but the boys would have scoffed if they knew. The 5 of them, Jaden, the oldest, sharp, watchful, a mind that never rested. Leo and Landon, 14-year-old twins, tech prodigies who once stripped hard drives for chips to trade for noodles. Mateo, 12, quiet, a street artist who sketched portraits with haunting clarity. Ari, the youngest, 8.5, obsessed with medicine, always scribbling treatments in a little notebook. They weren't related by blood, but they were a family. None of them would survive without the others. I'd seen Jaden trade books for fever meds when Ari was sick. He saw Mateo cry silently when someone stepped on his drawing. And that night, I saw something I'll never forget. When those boys climbed into Connor's car, I froze. Didn't know if I should call someone, or just believe in what I was seeing. I followed them. The next morning, I sent an email to the project team. I think I found something. I don't know what it is yet, but it feels important. No one replied, but something in me had changed. That same morning, in Connor Whitmore's penthouse, a place that had never known laughter, 5 pairs of wet shoes stepped lightly onto marble floors. 5 boys stood beneath crystal chandeliers, speechless before a world they had never dreamed of. And in that hush, a man slowly dying began to relearn how to live. None of them knew what lay ahead. Not Connor, not the boys, and certainly not me. But standing outside the glass wall, my fingers tightening around the camera, I whispered silently, "Please, don't send them away." Because sometimes, just one night is enough to change the lives of 5 children and to save a man who thought he had no more hope left. That morning, Seattle stirred awake after a night of relentless rain. The clouds still hung heavy, but light filtered through in thin, soft threads, tinting the high-rise windows a gentle gray. The streets below were still hurried, still cold, still indifferent as always. But on the 42nd floor of the Whitmore residence, a place that had known only wind and silence for years, there were new sounds today. The clink of a spoon against porcelain, the light footsteps of children, the soft rustle of fabric brushed against leather chairs and somewhere, a faint cough from a child still battling a cold. I stood by the doorframe, tucked into the shadow of the wall. No one noticed me, and I didn't want them to. I wanted to witness this moment in its purest form. 5 street kids, seated around a dining table nearly 3 meters long. A table that once only had one man, in one chair, with a glass of wine he never drank. Connor Whitmore sat at the head of the table. White shirt, sleeves rolled, tie loosened. His gaze was quiet, not controlling, not judgmental, just observing. As if even he wasn't sure if any of this was real or just a hallucination after a long, sleepless night. Jaden was the first to speak. He leaned forward, arms on the table, his voice low and steady. "You brought us here. For what?" The question dropped into the elegant room like a stone into a still lake. Connor looked up. I'll never forget that look in his eyes. Not angry, not startled, just surprised, as if he'd never expected to be asked that, and certainly hadn't prepared an answer. "I don't know," he said after a pause. "I saw you, and I couldn't keep driving." Leo snorted and leaned back. "Sounds like a Hollywood movie." Landon nudged his twin under the table, but didn't argue. Mateo just looked at Connor, his eyes unreadable. And Ari, sitting at the far end, asked in a soft voice, "Are you a doctor?" Connor raised an eyebrow. "No." "Then why do you have such a big medicine cabinet? And cancer meds?" The table fell silent. I saw Connor's lips tighten slightly. A faint twitch crossed his jaw, like someone had just touched a wound that hadn't healed. "You went through my meds?" he asked. But his voice wasn't angry. Ari looked down. "I'm sorry. It's just, I recognized the name of the drug. My mom used to take that too." Connor looked at him. For a long time, as if time itself had paused between two people from different worlds, yet bound by something unspoken. "I have pancreatic cancer," he said, voice calm as if reading a quarterly report. "They said I have 3 months left." No one responded immediately. No one knew what to say. Finally, Jaden broke the silence. "So, you brought us here so you wouldn't die alone?" Once again, Connor didn't deny it. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe I just wanted to see if, in these final days, I could do something right." The apartment began to change from that very morning. Dirty towels hung over the railing. The dining table was finally used. The TV, long forgotten, flickered on. The fridge, once only stocked with mineral water and wine, now held eggs, milk, and even marshmallows. I didn't take any photos that day. Didn't record a thing. I just stood behind the door, memorizing every glance, every breath, every careful touch on furniture that had never known the weight of small hands. As if the whole moment might vanish if acknowledged too loudly. Night fell. Connor stood alone in the library. I saw him looking at the shelves, holding an old frayed novel in his hands. Ari walked in. "Do you have any medical books?" the boy asked softly. Connor nodded. "Hundreds of them." "Can I borrow one?" "Of course." Ari was quiet for a moment, then added, "Adults usually don't let us borrow anything." Connor didn't answer right away. He simply reached up, pulled down a copy of Basic Human Anatomy, and placed it gently in the boy's hands. "Then I'll be the first adult who does," he said. "Deal?" When I left the house that night, I turned back for one last look. The 5 children, each hugging a pillow, lay scattered across the vast living room, like pieces from a puzzle that had fallen apart. But even as they lay far from one another, I saw their tiny fingers reaching out, trying to touch, just to be sure they weren't alone. And one man stood in the dark hallway upstairs, looking down in silence, as if still struggling to believe that he had just been forgiven by the smallest among us. 3 days later, on a Monday morning, I returned to the mansion as usual. The iron gate opened slowly before my car. Inside, the tension from that first day was gone. The smell of something baking drifted in from the kitchen. Clearly, Mateo was experimenting with a recipe. On the living room table, I saw a large hand-drawn blueprint covered in colored highlighter. Leo and Landon's basement renovation plan. Connor was sitting in his office, staring at a black screen. Not because he didn't know how to turn it on, but because, for the first time, he seemed to be thinking about something more important than work. "What do you plan to do with the kids?" His lawyer, Richard Kane, stood beside him. I heard the entire conversation from the hallway, my camera hanging at my side, palms sweating as if I were the one about to sign legal papers. Connor stayed silent for a long while. Then he spoke slowly. "I want to adopt them." Richard froze. "Are you serious?" "Very." "Connor, you have late-stage cancer. You've known these kids for, what, a week? You can't do this." "I can't not do this." That answer, I remember it exactly, sent a tremor through me. Not from fear, but because I realized some decisions don't come from logic, not even from instinct, but from the deepest part of a person, a place that only awakens when you've reached the edge of absolute loneliness. That evening, Connor gathered the children in the living room. There was no overhead light, just the flicker of amber from the fireplace, and the soft sound of rain tapping against the windows. The 5 children sat in a circle, each with a different expression. Ari leaned against Mateo's shoulder. Jaden crossed his arms, eyes fixed on the worn Persian rug. The twins seemed to be silently guessing what was about to be said. Connor stood. He didn't bring paperwork, no prepared speech, just a man, learning how to speak the truth. "I told you I only have 3 months left. That hasn't changed. But I don't want to spend those 3 months alone. I want to do something that matters. And I realized you are what matters." He paused, breathing in deeply. "I want to adopt you. Not out of pity, not because I'm dying, but because if I don't have much time left, I want to say I once had a family." The room fell silent. Jaden was the first to speak. He didn't say thank you, didn't nod. "Do you know what you're doing?" Connor gave a small nod. "I do. If you die, we're back to square one." Connor stepped forward and sat across from Jaden. His voice lowered. No longer the voice of a CEO, no longer one of command. "I'm not promising I'll survive, but I promise I'll fight, because no one has ever called me Dad before. And if there's a chance, I want to hear it, at least once." No sound followed, but I saw it with my own eyes. Jaden's gaze faltered, not out of weakness, but because, for the first time, he didn't know how to refuse a hand that asked for nothing in return. The next day, the news spread across financial channels and media outlets. Billionaire Connor Whitmore, diagnosed with only 3 months to live, files for adoption of 5 homeless children. People laughed, mocked, scoffed. One network even called it a lonely man's final romantic stunt. The board of directors was furious. Shareholders panicked. The New York Ledger ran the headline: "A dying CEO, 5 children, and a billion-dollar empire in limbo." But when I asked Connor if he regretted it, He just smiled faintly and looked toward the end of the hallway, where Mateo's first drawing now hung. 6 figures standing in the rain, hands touching. Above them, a faint streak of light, like the moon. Or maybe hope. "I don't care what they think," he said. "I only care whether the kids think I'm worth it." I've taken thousands of photographs in my career. But there's one frame I never needed a camera to capture. It was when the ballroom doors opened, and 6 people stepped through. 1 man, dying. 5 children who had never worn a suit in their lives. A family that hadn't yet dared to call each other by familiar names. And nearly 200 pairs of eyes, waiting to judge. It was the annual gala for Seattle's Pediatric Cancer Foundation, the most lavish winter event of the season, where businessmen wore charity-like masks, traded 8-figure checks, and toasted like it was a designer auction. Connor Whitmore was the guest of honor. But he didn't come alone. I arrived early to capture the behind-the-scenes. Inside the mansion, the tension was so thick, no one dared raise their voice. Connor wore a charcoal gray suit, neatly buttoned. Ari held his hand the entire time he adjusted his tie. Jaden leaned against the doorway, not hiding his frustration. "They don't want us there," he said plainly. Connor replied softly, without missing a beat. "Then we'll go, so they'll know it doesn't matter." Mateo was scribbling on the back of an invitation card, drawing 6 people holding hands in a crowd. Leo and Landon were still bickering about how tight their suit jackets felt. But in the end, they all got in the car. With him. The grand hall of the Fairmont Hotel gleamed in gold. Chandeliers ablaze, the orchestra humming like the quiet clink of champagne flutes. When Connor walked in, his hand rested gently on Jaden's shoulder, while Ari clung to his sleeve like it was instinct. The room went silent for exactly 4 seconds. Then came the murmurs, whispers, sniffs, half-suppressed smirks. "Those must be the kids, huh? Heard the older one used to run with a gang in Tacoma." Well, you can't blame a dying man for trying. We hadn't even reached our seats when Curtis Lane, CEO of a rival corporation, approached. The man was so polite it was unsettling, smiling with his mouth, but never with his eyes. "Connor, how touching, bringing your little ensemble with you." Connor remained calm. "They're my family, Curtis." "Oh, of course. I just wonder if your company's executive board shares your enthusiasm, especially now that your health is declining." Jaden looked like he was about to speak, then stopped himself. But it was Ari who broke the silence. The little boy looked up at Curtis, eyes wide, voice small but firm. Why does everyone only look at him when he's sick? But no one looked at him when he was all alone. The room froze, as if someone had turned off the music mid-ceremony. So still, even a spoon falling would have sounded like a bomb. Curtis didn't reply. No one did, because no one could. Connor lowered his head and gently touched Ari's shoulder. He didn't say a word, but at that moment, his eyes were wet. We left the gala earlier than expected. Not out of anger, Ahmet, but because we didn't need to stay a minute longer. On the ride home, I secretly turned on my camera and recorded the 6 of them sitting together, no longer hiding anything. Mateo leaned over my shoulder and handed me the drawing he had finished. "I'm going to make this one big, hang it in the living room." The drawing showed 6 people, but this time, they weren't lost in a crowd. They were standing on a hill, where no one had to bow their head, where no one needed permission to be loved. That night, I posted a photo I had taken from behind, of the 6 of them walking into the ballroom. The caption was Ari's words. Why does everyone only look at you when you're sick, but not when you're alone? Over 800,000 shares in 3 days. I once heard someone say, home is the place where someone is waiting for you at the door. But for nearly a decade at the Whitmore mansion, that door only opened for the mailman, the gardener, the hourly housekeepers. No one waited for Connor. No one asked where he was going or if he was tired when he came back. And then, everything changed. Because of things so small. No one could have predicted it. It started with the morning kitchen's sounds. No longer the pre-programmed hum of the espresso machine or the soft clink of crystal in a polished marble kitchen. Now, it was the clatter of pots and pans, the smell of burnt toast, and Landon yelling, "Matteo, you don't fry eggs with milk." Next came Connor, replacing a $10,000 Italian leather sofa with a worn, soft fabric couch. Because Leo said, "This one doesn't make your butt slide off." Then Ari convinced him to install a rolling bookshelf in the library, saying, "We're short. You can't keep all the medical books on the top shelf." Connor just laughed. I usually came in the afternoons. That's when each child seemed most alive in their own way. Jaden often sat on the north balcony, where the late lights spilled gently over the port. In his hands, old finance newspapers, or a laptop he was learning to use like a real investor. Leo and Landon turned a storage room into their tech center. Wires everywhere, circuit boards scattered. One day, I overheard them say, "I think we can redesign the mansion's security software with a simpler machine learning model." And they actually did. Matteo took over the brightest part of the living room as his art studio. Sketches lined the walls, Connor dozing in a chair, Ari laughing with a book, and me, Isabel, peeking through a camera lens. Then there was Ari, the youngest, but the busiest. He monitored Connor's health like a full-time nurse, tracking medications and appointments, even manually checking his blood pressure. He taped a note on the fridge that read, "Uncle Connor, 2 glasses of warm water in the morning, 3 minutes meditation, 1 hug, minimum 10 seconds. Connor never forgot, not because anyone made him, but because he wanted to. One afternoon, I was adjusting photos in the library when Connor walked in. He didn't speak, just stood and looked at the framed drawing Matteo had done of them from the gala. "Isabel," he said slowly, "for the first time in my life, this house has sound." I didn't answer, just watched his eyes fill with tears that refused to fall. That evening, Connor invited everyone to dinner at the big table, the one once reserved only for important guests. On it sat Matteo's roasted chicken, courtesy of YouTube, Leo's perfectly crispy fries, his second successful attempt, and Ari's mandatory salad. Because fiber is non-negotiable. No one wore anything fancy. Connor didn't either. He shared an embarrassing story from his school days, and for the first time, I heard real laughter echo through the house. Not polite laughter, but the kind that tells you belong. After dinner, I reached for my camera to capture the moment. But then, I stopped. Because the most beautiful picture wasn't meant to be taken. It was on the moment Connor bent down to pick up the shards of the glass Matteo had dropped. When he didn't yell, didn't scold, he simply looked at the boy and said, "It's okay. It's just a thing. You're not replaceable." I left the mansion that night with a strange feeling flooding my mind. Not quite hope, not quite peace, but a deep, quiet gratitude for having witnessed something rare. That a house, when filled with love, is never just a place to live. Some nights, the house was so still, it felt sacred. Not because no one was there, but because everyone was holding space for something, being nurtured. I started to notice it. From the faint light still glowing in the library at 2 a.m., from the soft footsteps echoing down the third-floor hallway. The printer in the study ran out of paper 3 times in 1 week. From the look in Jaden's eyes every time I asked, "Why are you up so late?" And he would simply say, "I like the quiet." One night, I decided not to leave. I sat silently in the dark corner of the living room, just a familiar shadow. At 2:15 a.m., the library door creaked open. Ari's soft cough echoed in the stillness. Then, one by one, they all walked in. As if this secret nighttime rhythm had become second nature. No one raised their voice. Leo laid out a spread of papers and circuits on the table. Landon opened his laptop, linking together financial data sheets. Jaden held a thick binder scribbled with unfamiliar symbols. Mateo unrolled a technical sketch of a medical device I'd never seen before. And Ari climbed onto a tall stool, placing a 500-page medical textbook on the table. They weren't playing. They were working. I stepped closer, not trying to hide my presence. "What are you doing?" I asked, just loud enough not to break the moment. Jaden didn't look up, but Ari turned, his eyes glowing with a blend of innocence and determination. "Ms. Isabel, we think we might be able to save Uncle Connor." At first, I thought I misheard. But then Jaden opened the binder, medical research, clinical files, genetic analysis, all copied from Connor's private clinic, where Ari had often accompanied him. The boy hadn't just watched. He had taken notes, memorized medical terms, and tracked every data point. "I know it's late-stage pancreatic cancer," Ari said, his voice trembling. "But there are experimental treatments. The problem is, no one dares to try, because they're afraid of failing." Mateo handed me his design, a sophisticated drug delivery system built from salvaged parts. Leo and Landon had constructed a computer model, simulating how the body might react to a combination of 2 newly formulated compounds with micro-dosing tech. Jaden, the one everyone thought only cared about finance, was the one compiling the research, sourcing anonymous funding, and even drafting proposals to potential biotech partners. "You think we just wanted a roof or money?" Jaden finally looked up at me. "Number, we don't want him to die. We want him to stay." I don't remember when the tears started. Not from hope, but because I had never witnessed a love so quiet, yet so fierce. Not in loud declarations, not in embraces, but in 5 children, once forgotten by the world, using their minds to hold on to the one man they called Uncle, but had come to mean everything. The next morning, I told Connor everything. He sat by the window, hands gripping a glass of water, his lips slightly quivering. I thought I was ready to go. "But you don't want to anymore," I said gently. He looked at me, eyes lost in wordless emotion. "No, Isabel. I think I've just been taught how to fight." That evening, when Connor entered the library, the 5 children sat still, as if bracing for anger, or at least a scolding. But he simply stepped forward and placed a hand on Ari's shoulder. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," Ari replied. "Just let us try." Connor smiled, eyes red. "So, where do we begin?" Trust, when built on gratitude and hope, can rise like a tower. but precisely because it stands so tall. When it collapses, it crushes everything beneath it. I had thought the hardest part of this story would be the illness, the time limit, the harshness of the world outside. I was wrong. Sometimes, what breaks us comes from someone who once stood the closest. Ever since Connor agreed to let the children begin Project Orion, an experimental treatment plan crafted from their own hearts and minds, the Whitmore mansion had nearly transformed into a miniature research facility. Ari tracked dosages and blood work each morning. Jaden reached out to doctors from Connor's past contacts, emailing under aliases. Leo and Landon created a private security interface for all their data. Mateo oversaw the assembly of the infusion system, monitoring every joint and line. And Connor began to fight. Truly. And he was improving. The latest test results showed early signs of remission, until Connor's private phone, the one that never left his nightstand, went missing. At first, everyone thought he had misplaced it, but no one could find it. The internal network registered no connections from the device. All security ports froze for exactly 15 minutes. At 3:12 a.m., something only one person had access to, Eleanor Hayes. Eleanor had been Connor's closest assistant for over 20 years. She knew all his passwords, encryption keys, habits, and medical schedules. She had been by his side through his loneliest years. And that morning, she vanished. Using their skills, Leo and Landon recovered a deleted security feed. The footage was grainy, but enough to show Eleanor entering Connor's room while he slept, rummaging through the nightstand, taking his phone, activating the front camera, and photographing the Orion file on the desk, before slipping away. "She knows everything," Jaden said, fists clenched. "The formula, the treatment schedule, even the financial algorithm I've been building for Uncle Connor." "Why?" Mateo asked, voice breaking. "Because she thinks we're not worth it," Ari whispered. That afternoon, I accompanied Connor to the Whitmore Systems headquarters. We found Eleanor in her usual office. She didn't look surprised. "I knew you'd come." "Why?" Connor asked, not angry, not loud, just hurt. Eleanor gave a soft, bitter laugh. 23 years, Connor. I was there when your wife died, when you cut every deal to the bone, when the world turned its back. And I waited for a thank you, for even a glance of recognition. And then you bring in 5 kids from nowhere, call them family. What about me? I never saw you as an outsider," Connor said, his voice hoarse, "but you made yourself one. Lawson promised me the CEO seat once the buyout goes through," Eleanor said coldly. "And now, with documents proving you're taking unapproved medication designed by minors, a dying CEO with a reckless plan, who do you think the board will side with?" That afternoon, as Eleanor left in the rival's black car, Connor stood motionless at the 42nd floor window, the same one he used to look through to feel above it all. This time, he wasn't above anyone. He just felt alone. That night, the mansion was silent. No clatter from the kitchen, no bickering from the twins, no Ari reminding him about his meds. Connor sat at the dinner table, a glass in front of him, without wine. All 5 children sat around him. No one spoke. At last, it was Ari, the smallest, yet always the first to step forward, who spoke in a voice soft as prayer. "Don't give up. They may have the data, but we have you, and we've never left anyone behind." Connor looked at them. These children who weren't promising victory, but promising not to walk away. And on that deepest night, a decision was spoken aloud. For the first time, not from fear, but from love. Then we'll fight, not for the company, not for legacy, but for this family. Some battles require no weapons and no blood, just belief. And that night, in the mansion perched on Capitol Hill, 6 people sat around a long wooden table, dividing their missions like a secret resistance group. Not against governments, but against judgment, betrayal, and death. Jaden pulled a large whiteboard from the library and wrote 3 lines. 1. Protect Connor's health. Lies 1. Prevent the company takeover. 1. Keep Project Orion confidential. These are our 3 fronts, he said, and each of us will lead one. Connor was still recovering from his latest infusion, but his eyes were unusually clear. No longer the distant CEO, just a father, listening to his children, each of them offering their voice to a plan no one ever taught them how to make. Jaden took the lead against the board and the financial world. He began posing as Connor's legal assistant, sending warning letters to shareholders, considering a sell-off to Lawson. With his self-taught knowledge, Jaden didn't just understand the law. He knew how to wield it as a shield. Leo and Landon immediately restructured the entire digital security system of the mansion and the company. They discovered at least 3 unauthorized breach attempts from Lawson's side, trying to steal Jaden's financial algorithm and Connor's medical files. "I've created a decoy system," Landon said. "They'll be pulling fake data." Mateo took on communications. The quietest among them now became the storyteller, designing images, behind-the-scenes footage of life in the mansion, but not posting them yet. He was preparing a short documentary to share their journey, set to premiere during the upcoming spring gala. "They laugh because they think we're a joke," Mateo said. "So let's show them. This is a story." Ari remained the mobile medical center of the group. He continued tracking Connor's condition, this time supported by 2 Korean doctors who had once worked with Elizabeth, Connor's late wife. They agreed to join Project Orion, not for money, but because of an email Ari had sent, written in simple, honest English, that moved them to tears. 3 weeks after Eleanor's betrayal, the city of Seattle still had no idea what was happening inside the silent mansion. But I did. I had lived with them. I had seen the sweat fall onto keyboards, the swollen eyes from sleepless nights, the quiet hand squeezes exchanged between a dying man and children once labeled invisible. One evening, while washing dishes with Ari, he suddenly asked, "Miss Isabel, do you think a person can belong somewhere if that place once didn't want them?" I looked at him, but didn't answer right away. Then from behind us, Connor walked in, hair tousled, wearing a simple gray sweater. He stood, looking at Ari for a long time, then said, "Ari, a place that doesn't need you isn't a place you're meant to belong." "But what about you?" the boy asked, voice trembling. "They applauded when you made $10 billion, and now they want to steal everything the moment you're weak." Connor sighed, then stepped forward, lowering himself to eye level with the boy. "I'm not the legacy of a company, Ari. I'm your legacy." And when he said that, I knew, even if they lost the battle against Lawson, against the media, against the cancer, this love could never be taken. 3 days later, the board announced an emergency vote. A motion to remove Connor from his executive role on the grounds of compromised health and unethical conduct. "If they win," Jaden said, "we lose everything." "If they win," Connor said, "we still have each other." Sometimes silence is the loudest sound in a room. And that morning, inside the 38th floor conference hall of Whitmore Systems, I felt it. like a verdict yet to be spoken, but with a gavel already raised. A glass-walled chamber under cold, clinical lights. 12 directors, all seated in a circle, faces mixed with sympathy and calculation. Every gaze locked onto one person at the center. Not Connor, but Jaden. Connor sat quietly at the back of the room, a thin coat over his shoulders, his face pale after 3 consecutive rounds of chemotherapy. My name is Jaden, 16 years old. No degree, no Harvard background, just one brain and one promise. Jaden didn't tremble. He didn't hold a sign. No PowerPoint slides. Just a boy with a clean haircut, standing tall in front of people who had once signed billion-dollar deals. I'm here because Mr. Connor Whitmore saved my life. And I believe if you vote to remove him from this company, you're not just betraying him. You're betraying the future of this company. A silver-haired woman clicked her tongue, cutting in. Do you even know who you're speaking to? Jaden smiled. The same people who once said no one from the streets could ever understand the stock market. So let me tell you a story. For the next 15 minutes, I didn't feel like I was listening to a teenager. Jaden detailed the financial strategy he and the twins had developed. Based on predictive microdata modeling for market shifts, something not even top investment firms had dared to implement. He didn't ask for permission, just laid out the numbers. 12% net return in 18 days on the test portfolio. 3 accurate forecasts of oil price trends. A fully encoded, simulated, and functioning system. I'm not here to brag. I'm here to remind you, if you remove Mr. Whitmore because he's sick, you're ignoring the very thing he gave us. The thing that's becoming this company's next breakthrough. The room fell silent. He didn't just create Whitmore Systems. He created us. Right then, my phone buzzed. Ari. I stepped out to answer. His voice was short, breathless, so urgent it made my knees go weak. Ms. Isabel, Uncle Connor's latest blood results. They've crossed the threshold. Crossed how? In the good direction. The cancer cells are regressing. 3 of the malignant clusters are shrinking. I stood frozen in the hallway of the 38th floor, speechless. Through the glass, I saw Connor looking into the distance, his eyes closed as if surrendering to a pain he knew too well. I re-entered the boardroom and whispered in his ear, Connor, they're losing, and you're winning. The vote took place 10 minutes later. The result? 6 votes to retain Connor, 4 against, 2 abstained. Jaden gave a slight bow, then turned to leave. Connor stood. For the first time in years, he walked through that aisle of executives without bowing his head, not because he had one, but because he finally knew. He wasn't fighting alone. That night, at the mansion, we all sat by the fireplace. Connor raised a glass of water, a substitute for wine, and lifted it gently. I used to think being alone was enough. But it turns out, real living is knowing someone wants you to stay. Ari scooted closer and whispered, You once saved us from the rain. Maybe now it's our turn to save you from disappearing. No one said anything after that. We didn't need to. We simply sat there. 6 people, once strangers, now a home. And I realized some families aren't made of blood. They're made of one thing only. The courage to stay when everyone else has walked away. We no longer counted time in days, weeks, or months. We counted by the heartbeats grew stronger, the moments Connor smiled without forcing it. In the mornings he woke up without needing painkillers, and every time someone in the house called him Dad. 3 months since the day he received his final diagnosis. The timeline the doctors once called the limit. But now he was standing, in a deep blue suit, at the podium of a newly inaugurated building, the Orion House, Center for Innovation and Child Empowerment. That day's guests weren't just entrepreneurs. They were people who once were like Leo, Landon, Mateo, Ari, and Jaden. Children who had once slept beneath stairwells, who had once been referred to by case numbers instead of names. That day, they sat in the front row, in simple uniforms, but with eyes that sparkled as if for the first time someone truly saw them. Connor walked slowly to the podium. His hands still trembled from the side effects, but his voice steady as if his heart were speaking for his worn-out lungs. I didn't think I'd ever stand here. Truly. 3 months ago, I was just waiting for the end. I had built an empire, but I had never built a family. I had wealth, but never a hand to hold when I needed one. He looked down at the front row, at the 5 children watching him, not like students, but like sons. And then I met them. I once thought I'd saved them, but the truth is, they saved me, not from illness, but from a loneliness that had lasted my entire life. Mateo designed the Orion House logo, an adult hand holding 5 small flames, each a different color. On the main wall of the atrium, Connor had requested this quote to be engraved. Sometimes you don't rescue children. Sometimes they rescue you. After the ceremony, I found Connor standing alone by the window, looking out over the city. I asked him, if you could go back to the beginning, would you do anything differently? Connor stayed silent, then turned to me, his voice low, steady, but warmer than any answer I had ever recorded. Number, if I had one more life to live, I'd still choose them. That evening, in the kitchen of the mansion, the kids gathered around the table. No gala, no media, just pizza, soda, and laughter echo through a space that once had been as quiet as a hospital. Ari came in with a white envelope. It was the latest test result. Uncle Connor, he said, your cancer markers, they're negative. Connor covered his face, but I saw it. He was crying, not out of fear, but because for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was about to lose anyone anymore. That night, I wrote the final line in my project journal. They laughed when he adopted 5 kids from the streets, but they weren't laughing anymore when those children saved his soul. Thank you for staying until the final moment of this story. Maybe somewhere in each of us, there's a part like Connor. Once lonely, once believing we had nothing left to give. And maybe, like those children, we're just waiting for someone to believe in us. Even just once. And that would be enough. If this story touched something inside you, leave a message. Because maybe someone out there needs to hear exactly what you're about to write. And if you want to keep listening to stories about kindness, redemption, and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return, subscribe to this channel. Not for the algorithm, but because here, every story is a warm breath in a world that moves too fast. See you in the next video, where the smallest moments can still save an entire life.